Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast with me, your host, Matthew Watts, founder and managing director of Rockborn. This is a podcast where I share the stories, views, opinions and career journeys of the movers, shakers, innovators and leaders in the real estate industry. Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. Today, we're joined by Ainslie McLennan, Managing Director and Head of U.K. Balanced Funds at Nuveen. Ainslie began her career working in the investment department at Ryden Property Consultants in Edinburgh, where she qualified as a chartered surveyor before moving to P.J. Leggett & Co. She joined Henderson Global Investors in 2002 and remains with the business today, having gained extensive experience running commercial property mandates, investing in the U.K. and European markets. In 2016, Ainslie was recognised by City A.M. as one of the city's 100 most influential women. And a year later, she was shortlisted for Investment Week's Fund Manager of the Year. A year after this, in 2018, the Janus Henderson U.K. Property PAIF received the Portfolio Advisor Platinum Award. Ainslie, welcome to the podcast.
God, you make me sound a lot better than I am.
You've had an incredible career, so I really appreciate you coming to join me today. So a place I always like to start is how did you get into real estate? Because from a little bit of the research that I've done, you didn't study it.
No, I didn't start there. It wasn't something, it was nowhere my frame of reference as I went off to university. I just kind of wanted to go away to university. That was kind of the holy grail. And I started out at university. I went to Aberdeen and I was doing accountancy, which I loathed within 10 minutes, philosophy. And I knew within literally a couple of weeks, God, what have I done? And it took me probably another half a year to have the confidence to have a chat with my parents about the fact that this definitely wasn't where I saw my future, but I was loving being at uni. So I really went around it in the way where you look at what courses would keep me there. So there was nowhere else I could do it. And I'm from Glasgow, and they do have a similar course that they were running at Ainslie, but the only other place you could do this kind of land economics degree was at Aberdeen. And hence I did my sort of homework on switching to that. And that was, I'm ashamed to say it, but that was really how it kind of kicked off for me.
So you didn't like your degree, but how did real estate come into the frame?
Well, land economics was, you could choose to do urban or agricultural land economics, and I picked urban, and it really led down that route of, just surveying was going to be the profession out of that. Really, that was the main place people went when they left uni, was to do their chartered training. But interestingly, in my honours year, actually, I did my dissertation on a sustainability theme, and I think actually that was, it's in my DNA. That was always of interest to me right at the very beginning of everything I did. And I was lucky that I managed to get a graduate position at Ryden in Edinburgh after I graduated, and off I went. So, it was really sort of, I tripped into it, but maybe really fortuitous that I did.
And you're an investment surveyor for the early part of your career?
I did my training in the investment team at Ryden, and that was great. I worked with a very lovely team, and I very luckily had a very strong female ultimate boss who kind of paved the way and helped me maybe kind of create my character as a graduate, because it was still, people get annoyed when you sort of say it was quite a male dominated environment. It absolutely was, but she was a very strong female leader, and she had a great sense of humor, and she led with strong principles, and she got things done. She was super bright, and I just tried to learn as much as I could of her, the way she conducted herself in what was quite, you were the graduate, so you were kind of sort of seen as the runaround. And also you're trying to be you're the only kind of young girl in the team. I think she just wanted to make sure she was a really good mentor in that respect as well, and she pushed you forward. And sort of, if somebody messed around, if you sometimes had investors or clients who were just a bit belittling, just not necessarily speaking in the way that any of us would expect to hear that now. I'd faint if I thought that my daughter was spoken to like that. But she always sort of said, you stick to the professional answer, you don't get carried away or give the face doom, and you kind of use your brain to keep moving forward rather than getting caught in these tiny little moments, and keep a sense of humor. And actually, I have to say, that served me really, really well and everything. And I really enjoy what I do, and that's changed many times over. Although I started in investment and I've kind of always been in investment, moving to client side just completely opened the door to me on what it really meant to be in the industry, because I could really make a positive difference from inception, you could be involved right through to when you maybe disposed of an asset or a fund or made a broad decision to do something that was going to benefit investors, and you could enjoy the journey of that or have the pain of the journey of that, depending on how it's going. But you owned that responsibility. Whereas when I was on the agency side of it, you do maybe a deal for somebody. And I did find that I found all that quite hard. I found the cold calling quite hard, I find generating it, initially when you're learning your way as well, it's quite investment's quite a heavy area to be in because the margins and numbers are bigger. You've got to make it all happen and it's all millions. It's not like you're doing, a rates review or something like that. You're really trying to kind of move the dial for people. And I definitely felt more comfortable in my own skin as soon as I moved to the client side. And I've, tried really hard to kind of create and make that something that I can do a really good job for.
So how long were you in the investment agency space before you decided to pivot? About
4.5, 5 years. I did it took a couple of years to become chartered and then I moved across. And then I worked for a lovely man called Peter Leggett for a year, but that was commuting from Edinburgh to the Borders where he was based in terms of the sort of investment company he ran. And I just could feel that I needed to go to a bigger space. And I was lucky that I was interviewed for this position at Henderson at the time in 2002. And I, managed to get that job. And that was really what catapulted me down into London and into a company that I got the opportunity to have, such an incredible journey on.
So Henderson at the time, can you give me a bit of a picture about the business at the time and then also the role that you took up?
Yeah, so I was interviewed by a guy called Mike Sales, who's
still
the business, and who was in charge of balance funds at the time, and he was recruiting for somebody to assist as a kind of a portfolio manager on a set of the funds that they were running for some Middle Eastern clients who were invested in a number of different mandates in the UK. They had bespoke mandates. And so when I got that job, I literally came in and that was me. It wasn't, the training, it was a much smaller team. It was very hands-on. It was very practical learning. You weren't on the sidelines at all. You were involved from day one. It was before, we're in these sort of structures now where you have teams of asset managers, teams of the investment people for different sectors, and the life funds and that kind of business did have that. But for balance funds, it was much more, you were a jack of all trades. And that's always been that's resultantly been my passion because I've been able to be broad. So we've had to, my team and myself, we're not beholden to one sector. We can literally move in and out of sectors as we feel it is appropriate for the investor or trend we're seeing or demographic changes. And the diversification you can get with that, of course, spreads the risk, but it also means that you're learning in all markets and geographies at all different times. And that has changed hugely in the 20 years because before it was literally office, retail, industrial.
Yeah.
And that was the universe, the investable universe. And, now there's probably a list of 30 different things that you would consider to be real estate, sensible, liquid in many respects, and depending on what you go for, investments within that, within the same sort of footprint of the UK, which is just amazing.
So your role spanned investment and asset management, some portfolio management?
We did. Well, we back in the day, we outsourced a lot of that asset management under us. So we had to, it was your duty to make everything perform. It was really great. I got to cut my teeth on lots of different things, including a small kind of residential fund at one point as well. So it was a great place to kind of really get to understand fund management, and it just kept evolving. So I was involved in a variety of different funds. I then started to run the UK pension funds that we run, which we still run, and that was really great as well because you could really make quite a difference there. And there are discretionary mandates that you're really making. You can see your 5-year plan of what you want to do and how you're going to execute it. And I mean, that's all very satisfying. And I think that's partly, it's again for me, from cradle to grave on the experience of what you choose to do, justifying it, not just to yourself, but to an IC, getting peer buy-in, everything that can affect, just make you double down on your decision to do it, which is kind of one of these, you kind of catch your breath and think, is this really the deal? And, that I kind of like that part of it. I also have found over the years with the different clients that we've had, I really enjoy eyeballing the clients and being able to be on the hook, face to face, and really, because there's nothing more powerful than sitting in front of a client saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, and we will deliver this, to make it so, when you've sat in front of someone and said it. And that's great in good times. But actually, what I've learned over the years, and particularly, I'm sure we're going to talk about the open-ended fund that I run, but, when things weren't so easy and being in front of clients, just as soon as anything needs to be communicated, never, ever hide from it. Just always get on and do it, because everybody goes on the journey together then, rather than kind of creating polar positions. Yeah. And I enjoy that. I enjoy making sure that we have done the absolute best we can when we sit down and talk to our investors about what we're up to.
So were they kind of commingled funds at the time, or were they just
they were all separate mandates?
Separate mandates,
yeah.
But were they, and what was the kind of the tenure or the average, time for those?
Oh, I mean, we've had some of them for years and years and years, these mandates, and they continue to be with us. And so they are more invested in they really have understood that property is a long-term investment. Some investors in property say they understand that, but I don't sometimes feel that they do understand that. But I think that, these investors are looking for steady income, building capital over time, just with sensible investments. Of course, the pivot has been very much for many of them, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about this, towards how they decarbonise a lot of these buildings as well, and how they make themselves all as an entity cleaner.
Yep.
And that's great, because when you're mandated to do it, it's actually a lot easier than trying to make it so with people who aren't maybe quite so focused on that. They're long-term players in these markets. So it's been great.
So your career has kind of evolved and grown as the business has as well, and the mandates have evolved too within the business.
Yeah. Henderson acquired New Star back in 2009. And I did the analysis on that portfolio before, when we were wondering if we would take it on. And I just knew from the outset, I was like, this has to be, I have to do this.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that was a retail fund.
It was a retail
at the time,
fund,
right? And you guys are very institutional.
Henderson are, Nuveen, so what's been born out of Henderson is much more institutional, especially in the UK. But in, when they acquired the whole platform, we were thrown into the retail world. By God, I absolutely loved it. I loved that the man in the street could invest in a fund that we were operating. I loved that, I could easily invest in a fund that we were operating, that it could make a positive difference to all layers in the investment chain. And I definitely found that really meaningful, much more meaningful than investing money when I had at the outset for some of our Middle Eastern clients, people who had a lot of money, you were investing money for, but it was never in a small fund. It was never going to transform their day, whereas it could actually have a helpful pension contribution to somebody who had put a slug of their money into the fund. And
did you feel that weight of the responsibility and the expectation to manage that retail fund more greatly than a more institutional pension fund, or do you just kind of take the emotion out of it, and is that what makes a good fund manager?
I just felt Marcus Langland's Pierce came over from New Star, and he and I joined forces to kind of co-run this fund, and we were just so into it. Like, we were so into making it the best version of events that it could be. And that's partly, the competitive nature of us wanting it to be a best-in-class product. And you're in a peer group and you want to be, making a difference and standing out, because your track record and your performance helps, the distribution team in terms of getting you in front of people. And we had to build up track record, because we'd never, generally with retail funds, they want 3 years track record to know that you're generally going to deliver. All the things that kind of you hone in, you're laser focused on, right, what do we need to do? And with it being a daily traded fund, which I'd never run a daily traded fund before, really quickly, Marcus and I were, we took the fund on at 550 million. It quite quickly went back to 500 million. And so you're seeing that daily outflow, because I wasn't used to that, the midday trades would come in, you'd be like, what's going to happen today? Was that we stylized it very quickly away from the value add element, which a lot of which probably wasn't the right long-term holdings for the fund, and into core, like, be steady on our income. We can build on that. Let's have no surprises at the tenant level, so that we're not giving, the distribution will be steady and people will feel that. And in quarterly, they'll just know that you're managing it really well. But they'll know what's coming to them, and that will help, because it will build a steady kind of base upon which to gain trust and hopefully longer term track records. And so we did that, and we started. That was sort of from 2010 on. We were shaping the portfolio, And we were early into some trends. I mean, very quickly we were acquiring alternatives for that fund. And it held, over the years that we ran it, everything from data centres to care homes, student, leisure. We went through the whole car showrooms at some points. We had a really broad spread. I mean, we'd build up almost what we considered sub-portfolios as well sometimes. So we owned a lot of really great London pubs, which we would kind of portfolio up. So we would know there was liquidity, but we would also be enjoying some very good long-term income. And we bought early into these, so the yields were much higher when we bought into when they became normalised.
Were you picking some stuff out of the banks or out of any sort of
everywhere, yeah, because we were growing by then. So we took that, we got to 2.5 years. People were starting to buy the fund, much more consistent about purchases, inflows, daily inflows. And in 2012, we put our first solar panels on a B&Q that we had in Farnborough, which was a huge B&Q. I think it was the second biggest in the UK or something like that. So it had a huge roof expanse. And B&Q were great about that. They wanted to work with us to get the benefit of that. And very quickly, they were making savings on their energy costs. Retail warehouse, it's not exactly the most insulated. It's vast, and it can be recalled. Doors are opening and shutting all the time. So they were making savings. And we started from there on, let's really look at this portfolio and see, we have a lot of Southeast as well. At that time, we were probably about 70-75% Southeast based. We had a lot of industrial, a lot of retail warehousing, all was fitting the bill. And we started to really roll that sort of ESG thought and mainly about energy into the portfolio. And
who was driving that? Was that the occupier?
We were.
You were deciding and you thought this would actually be good business.
Yeah, because we were trying to find ways as well of being able to engage with tenants. And very quickly we realised that often led to a renewal of a lease. It was goodwill with the tenants. They were making savings. They could see themselves there longer. It removes some potential obsolescence if things weren't invested in. And that was, but it also was the right thing to do.
Is that because government grants and you're taking advantage of that?
We had a little bit of that initially, but it sat as a line on the valuation, and we were doing well out of it. So I think it just made sense. I mean, sometimes a unit, in fact, in one situation when we sold an asset, we kept the solar panels. Our return was about 8% on that, and we disposed of it later. But it was good business, but we could also see that it gave longevity to assets that were good assets, and they did quite often help us attract the right tenants, or the tenants that had the credentials that we really wanted in a fund that should have a strong backbone of income as its main delivery for an investor who didn't want to be. They wanted all their high octane stuff elsewhere. They wanted their diversified commercial property fund to be, risk averse, steady Eddie, sitting in the corner for maybe 4 to 5% of allocation, maybe a little bit more, sometimes maybe a little bit less at others, but just to be, dull and steady. And this was a way of helping build the blocks that would keep that fund kind of at the front of the pack in terms of being able to deliver good things.
Yeah.
And we absolutely loved it, Marcus and I. And the team, Robin, Rob, Manreet, we were really into it. It was like we were always trying to be dynamic, and the fund was growing, so we could really be dynamic in terms of the kinds of things that we got into and got involved with that were asset management plays, but de-risked quite a lot of the time. So we didn't go in for anything particularly speculative. And where we did, I did definitely feel the burden of that. Even if we did well out of that, I would always think, gosh, we've just got to remember what's right for us. It might not be some deals might not be right for us. They might be great deals, but they might not be the deals for this particular mandate. We ran that really very joyfully, I can say, right through to literally the morning of the result on Brexit. And I had just had my second child and was just back at work. And I remember feeding him about 4 a.m. and my husband saying, "Oh my God, it's to go." And sort of quickly kind of showering and getting dressed and going into work. And it was really interesting because the main floor at Henderson was absolutely buzzing. All the equities and bonds teams were running about. And then you go onto the property floor and it was sort of, I think Mike would definitely have been in, definitely PR would have been in, I was in, and maybe 2 of the team were in. But you really realise very quickly that a daily traded fund is just a totally different experience from an institutional mandate or something where they're just there is no, they're just watching now. They're not able to do anything. Whereas a daily traded fund, it can be significant on a daily basis.
I was going to ask you, how much, when you're managing that, how much cash reserves do you hold versus how do you manage that cash versus the equity invested?
So at times when we were taking very steady, healthy daily net inflows, we would, maybe have brought it down to 11, 12%, something like that. Average would probably have been about 15. That would be my kind of ideal. But at other times we would, if we could feel something was coming towards us, we would raise it, and sometimes be up in the early 20s, depending upon how we felt things were shaping up. And that was sensible. You used to go one of two ways for investors, because they want performance, but they want liquidity, and they can't decide sometimes which they want more.
And real estate, in terms of an inherently illiquid asset class, it's juxtaposed.
So you could really hack someone off by being at 20%, and they're like, we want it working. But, the next meeting you could go to, you get the vibe, be there, be at that level.
Yeah.
And I guess because you're competing against a peer group where, a sensible investor would usually be invested in 2 or 3 of the funds in the peer group. And I think that's great, because then they're getting so much more diversification. It was a really good peer group. But you just always wanted to have the edge and be a bit better. So you're kind of always having a focus. I guess you're being measured against that. And the liquidity levels varied for the different funds at different points for different reasons, because some of them might see, a bigger single outflow or something that was quirky that happened. So, no 2 days were the same for any of us. But again, I think that I would argue that kept us sharp, because we always had half an eye on the liquidity of the illiquid assets.
And
you know what I mean?
Did you always have like a couple of jewels in the crown that were primed, that if you needed to, you could just exit, super quick?
We did, but we also, the jewels in the crown, we tried to have quite a few of them actually, because, you really want to hold them if you could, because there are some assets that we loved and you wanted them to stay as long as possible. And the only kind of barrier to that eventually on some situations was the skew they had if they were sizable. People always worried that really big assets would be illiquid. And for us, some of our biggest assets were so incredibly liquid, and they helped to sort it out really quickly to sell one of them for liquidity and do very well out of it. And that's just the way it was in reality for us. But I know for other people, they found it easier with smaller investments. So I think it's just dependent on maybe what the assets were at the time in the sectors. And things like, to go back to those London pubs, which sticks in my mind, because one of the pubs we owned was a local pub to where I live. But having them portfolioed up and able to go as one chunk was incredibly attractive to some people. And sometimes we'd sell them individually here and there, but other times you could group them.
There's a portfolio premium attached to it.
And people they wanted a big long lease to, it was playing, and especially London, and there were locations that people generally would know and like, and it made a positive difference. So I think we did try to think of it in a multi-layered approach of, not just asset by asset, not just top down, not just bottom up, but also groupings, timings.
I was going to say retail. I wonder how you kind of navigated that.
We also initially there was a bit of debate about, because some other funds in the peer group had shopping centres, and I had a huge aversion to that, because I just felt it was, for no other reason at the time. It wasn't like I predicted anything on shopping centres, but it just felt like a really big skew and a lot of work as a big single skew that you couldn't really break up. And I was worried about that. So we didn't ever go into anything like that. We were mainly in retail warehousing and food. So actually we were quite protected. We weren't completely protected, but we were quite protected. And also we didn't go into fashion parks. It was kind of a much more bulky goods style retail warehousing. So again, it wasn't off crazy rents. So when rent started to rebase, we weren't going from 80 to 30, they were never off those rents. So we kind of had, less to fall. Ultimately, some of that retail warehousing was disappointing. We had to sell everything in the end up. But they were actually pretty good assets that you'd like to have owned. Like, you'd have done quite well on the bounce on them. But we had to sell, and you couldn't be emotional about that. And we weren't. We were very businesslike about it. But it's when you see the opportunity, but you can't hold on to it. And ultimately, for the fund, that was where we got to. It was shrinking, and it was more about liquidity. Keep staying in that top quartile whilst giving liquidity was becoming the main focus, as opposed to it leveling out and us seeing a growth trajectory again. And once the FCA had come out with their kind of consultation paper, for many investors, completely understandably, they, felt that was just not palatable because it was just too uncertain.
And so the fund wound down?
We put the portfolio quietly onto the market, and it was sold in its entirety, which was in May last year, which was, great timing. It was a good price, and that was the right thing to do, really, I guess, from a business perspective. And we haven't kind of missed that part of where Henderson ended up I became part of Nuveen in 2014. So the mandate I was running for Janus Henderson was actually a sub-delegated kind of mandate where we were doing the property element of that mandate, but it was operated on that retail platform by Janus Henderson. So there was also the dynamic of that, which, again, it was great working with other teams inside and outside of the business, but it's kept that whole team really broad and really capable, and they really are a fantastic team.
How do you manage the decision making process with someone like Marcus if you're kind of both in charge of it rather than one being out and out calling the shots?
I mean, we didn't. It wasn't even just Marcus and I. We would debate it. We would really debate it, and we would disagree, which I think was healthy. And we would find a longer term view that we felt was right. But we would do it by detective work. I mean, we would literally go and dig about until we felt we had enough of the right answers to come down on one side or the other of something. And I think that's a healthy way to be. And maybe a bit bossier. I don't know. I don't know what he'd say about that. But I think I was always very, very. He's one of the best dealers you'll ever see in the market. He's got an incredible network. He's incredibly well thought out. He can sense a good deal. I think I was always very strong on, does this deal fit for this type of mandate? Is this going to be the next piece of our jigsaw? And that's why we were probably quite good for each other, because I could never do anything like what he does in terms of his ability to really negotiate and be involved in incredible deals. But I can be absolutely there from that kind of investor perspective and the longer term strategy, and where there might be risk at other parts of the portfolio is this right now for us? Can we make this right? Is this going to be the next best?
So together, it's like a winning combination.
I felt it was, yeah. I mean, it definitely was. We had good performance. We did a really good job for the investors. And we're focused on Marcus and myself, but none of this could happen without the rest of the team that were working on this. And they're all incredibly talented fund managers now in their own rights, and we're growing through learning, doing a job like this, which is arguably one of the best jobs you could possibly be involved in, because it's never stopped. We were always buying, always selling. So for the team, you were always at that sharp end of the market. You were never it wasn't a closed-ended mandate where you maybe bought something twice a year and worked up an asset for sale. I mean, we were selling and buying assets. As we crystallise asset management plans, we would move it on if we needed to move it on. So we didn't hang back, and that meant everybody was on their best game all the time, trying to make it a really successful kind of outcome in each event.
And so, is that what kept you at TH?
Probably,
just given the variety and the people as well.
It probably was between that period, from 2009 right up to really now, because it was, we were just learning all the time. So it's really been that kind of 13-year period has just been, has allowed me to evolve so much and learn so much. And, it's kind of something that hardly anyone would get to do in their career. And we all absolutely thrived on it.
What are the traits? What are the traits that you think are really important that people possess when building a high-performing team? Because you touch on your team a lot.
I love my team.
In terms of building them and the personalities. What is it, about the collective or the individual that you look for?
Well, I look for lots of different. You look for them all to be really different, because I think that's great, and I think we all enjoy the differences. That we all have different skill sets, and that's marked, and that's really good, because if we sit down to have a conversation, we'll get lots of different views and opinions. Culturally, just all really great, can-do, team-playing people who want to make a positive difference. So you're not coming up against anyone with an ego that's dominating or thinking that we're all equal, but they're more equal. It just doesn't. I don't think that would work for my personality, but I don't think it would work for any of the people that I sit with to feel that. Pushing the boundaries, trying to make it different, trying to make us all a bit more not being scared to speak up if you think something should be different, if we should question something. There's just such a variety of things, but it's quite guttural for me. It's probably not something that I don't know how everybody else works, but I think for me, you kind of feel the right thing that you need in the team, and I think we've got a really good spread of people, and they really are. They're top notch, and so they make my day. Put it that way. I enjoy.
They're people you like working with.
I really like working with them.
You respect and you work for them more so than they work for you. Really.
I just feel like they're all people that want to do really well in the business because they're really strong.
Now, as head of UK Balanced Funds, can you just give me an overview of what your role is now? And
so what we're doing, we've got a number of mandates. We just won a new mandate at the end of last year, which has just been onboarded. And I guess diversified funds are a variety of segregated mandates. We sold some mandates for Middle Easterns. We've got a large UK pension fund, particularly a large UK pension fund that we're now doing as well. It's kind of a variety pack of different mandates, and we're continuing to look at other mandates that we might kind of work towards. But over that really from the beginning of COVID, I'm born of the experience on PAIF, which I don't think I mentioned, but in 2000, after all the work we were doing on solar in 2019, Janus Henderson kindly allowed us to create a second objective on that fund, which was to be aiming to be operationally net zero carbon by 2030. And we had been working on it really since 2012. And, it was a big challenge because it's such a diverse set of assets. And you are maybe going to have to sell some of them as well. It wasn't no guarantee you could hold them all, but we pushed forward with that. We pushed our own boundaries on that because we just felt that also when you make that commitment, it's incredible how you move towards it. And we weren't doing it lightly. We knew we could see the pathway. We'd worked out the capex. We knew that it made sense. We knew it probably would bring us and continue to hold the right tenants and longevity of lease, and things would flow from that. And we could see regulation coming. But if you weren't ahead of the game, you were kind of failing your investors, in my view.
So you'd spotted that.
We'd spotted that
taken it to the investors and the occupiers rather than the occupiers demand it, or rather than the investors demanding it. You took it to them.
We took it to them, yeah. And we have a great sustainability team in-house as well who were massively part of the team on that to make that so. And born of that was the fact that you could get a mandate to do things. And my mind had been turning towards, what does impact look like in the UK? Because impact, I think, is different in different jurisdictions, dependent on what's available. If you're setting out your stall to give a financial return, a carbon return effectively in terms of goals, and societal returns, so you can actually see that it's benefiting a community or that it's making a positive difference to a location. If you're allowed that mandate and people invest on that basis, knowing that is what you're there to do, you're not just there to give a financial return. That's part of it. That's not all of it. Then, that could be a bit of a game changer for the kind of your ability to act, rather than, think it's nice to have, but never be able to do it because not just going to focus on the best possible financial return for the investor. And so we started to work over it was kind of a lockdown project over what does that mean? What should that mean in the UK footprint, and how should we measure what would even be an appropriate investment that could be taken through that journey? And we started to do a lot of work on that. And, it just felt like the next evolution of we should all be doing what we should be doing on carbon. If people are not, it just, it takes my breath away. And people are not up early in the morning about that. Got to get on with it. But
the carbon piece.
Yeah, but the societal piece is sort of elusive because people bucket impact. They often just think housing, like it just kind of sits there. But having come out of this diversified funds background, I just see really clearly that it's not just housing. It's everything you touch in the built environment. Has a role to play in terms of how you help create safe spaces that are relevant for people who can do business out of them, who can be communities in them, who can live in safe spaces, who can get the right healthcare and education. It's the built environment is where it's at. So, you can't compartmentalize it, I don't think. I think it's hard to see that through when there's not that many mandates that are, have been set up for a long time, who have all the track record of doing these projects, but it's not and I've said this before, it's not rocket science. A lot of it is very practical. It's how you measure what you do. And I think there aren't obvious baselines yet in these areas of, okay, this is how you measure societal and there's, even in carbon, we were having this debate last week where for some investors, it might be GRESB, it's the most important thing. For others, it might be a BREEAM status. And different investors have signed up to think the one thing's right. But if you're managing, especially with a group of investors, they may all have different things that are important to them.
They're conflicting.
And so what's the best thing to do with that asset to actually decarbonise, to make it efficient and effective, where you are having to use CapEx to do that? Which one is actually going to have the most meaningful difference? And does that tie up with what different investors might fancy as the score they want to give in their end of year update or whatever the thing is?
Do you feel you've had to shuffle the pack in terms of investors who aren't on board with that, or maybe got opposing opinions?
Yeah, so with full impact now, we've come up with a structure and we're now kind of like looking for a cornerstone to be the right kind of investor to kind of move forward with that. And that's something that will happen as it's ready to happen. I think we're still quite early out the blocks in terms of delivering something that's not a pure housing strategy. So I think that there's an education piece that we need to do really well on that, and we need to make sure that people fully understand the diversification benefits of mixing uses, and I think losing that landlordy arrogance, which is less there now, but was definitely there when I first started out in my career, where the landlord was some kind of king or queen, and tenants were
over you.
Deciding things.
Yeah.
And having a business plan that decided what that would be, and never having heard the voice of the community, and never having understood that geography well enough to know there was actually a better way of doing it. It was kind of, because it was all financial. So it was like, what is the quickest way to create the win, or to create the long lease, or to create. But having understood a community, having understood the uses that things could be, making sure that you've incorporated that into what becomes your ultimate business plan. The landlord role has to be more dynamic, I think, than the, in inverted commas, old days, where it was kind of, like you said, slightly lording over what would happen. And that's something I think is hugely exciting, because I think it probably gets the better outcome. But I would say, just being very realistic and honest is quite sticky as well. It's quite hard work, because firstly, communities all have different, within that community, there's a million different opinions.
Yeah.
Quite often people with very loud voices as well that may have a good opinion, but there may be someone with a quieter voice that actually has a better way of doing something. So you're trying to kind of, you could get bogged into something where it's hard to make a move, which I think is not what we're about. And also I still think that particularly in some communities that possibly need the investment most, there's a mistrust of a landlord, and that's on us. That's a black mark to landlords. And we have to do the work better on not being seen as a baddie or someone who just takes rent. It needs to be a bit more
a collective group.
Yeah, just a bit more of a team to get the right result. And I'm very interested in making improvements to the way that we all invest. And I really like the idea of investing in existing footprint as well, rather than trying to build your way out of it, which we've done sometimes successfully. I'm not talking about us as a house, as a country.
Yeah.
We don't always get that right. And even if you think about enterprise zones, new towns that were built, it's just a lot of building, and some of that worked and some of that didn't work. It's all done quite quickly. There wasn't always proper community link up with some of that as well. I think repurposing what's already there is probably the right thing to do, where you can make it viable. So I think you can try and start there, proper refurbs or proper repurposing or change of use, but with something that's already standing. And if you can't do that, you go through the different layers of what you can do. But I think that's probably the right place to start, as opposed to imagining that everything should be development.
Is the social value portal a place to start in terms of measuring?
Yeah, it's great.
And is that kind of one of the premier or one of the leading?
Yeah, I mean, I try really hard to be just very open to all of it, because I feel like the more information we all gather now, I'm sure forums and groups will keep developing and having an articulate voice in how it should really look in terms of measurement. I think the measurement piece on social is just the piece that's it's not, it isn't tricky in some respects because it's very transparent. I mean, if you set out to kind of create jobs or, create safe homes, add healthcare to somewhere that didn't have it, that needed it, they're quite obvious statements. When you do them, you've done them. But there's also a lot that's quite nuanced around all of that as well. Spin-offs, how people get to work, all the different elements of that. I think having common ways that everyone is happy to kind of information gather, which is not dissimilar to carbon really, but I think societal's further behind the carbon. That still needs to be worked through.
Can you offset social value? So if you're doing something in London, can you offset it against scheme in Manchester, or does it not work like that?
I think being honest to your business plan depends. I think it's about transparency of asset by asset, business plan by business plan. You may find that you can do the carbon part of the impact project earlier than you can do the societal piece. The societal piece might be a longer play on one building, just call it in Manchester, and you may be able to capture it quicker in Liverpool on both, or on the societal piece but not the carbon piece, because you won't get the lease back until a certain time and the tenant won't, whatever the thing is. And they'll all be different. I think it's about just being brutally honest, because what you're doing is still better than not doing anything. So it's important, I think, for the investor to be able to say, yeah, no, I subscribe to that, or no, I just don't fancy not. Yeah, I think it's just about kind of us all learning as we go, and it will keep changing. Best practice will keep changing how it looks.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a big business, Nuveen, optically, maybe it seems like probably quite a difficult, changing big businesses and getting them around to the ideas of having impact at the heart of what they're doing. Probably more challenging than maybe some smaller businesses. How do you navigate that?
Being in a big business.
Or does it come down to the culture of the business?
It probably does a bit, but our RI team is, long-standing at TI and Nuveen, and impact in the US is huge. So I think we're learning from the fact that they are so sort of developed out as they are. That's in real estate been about housing. So I'm probably, this healthy challenge there on can we be something other than housing as well? We'd have housing in it, but could we have something that was, straddling over onto commercial too? But I don't mind challenging that a little bit. I think it's important to say it, and I think we are the right house to be early to do it, because I think we have, Nuveen is just an incredible support network to help you deliver what you're setting it to deliver. So we should be kind of people who can make it so and do a good job for investors.
Is there anyone else that you look out across the market who's doing this and helping pioneer it and drive it forward as well?
There's 2 or 3 places that are. So I think, lots of us are kind of trying to get these things going, and we have used outside bodies as well to help kind of give us, in inverted commas, that sort of friendly challenge, friendly feedback, critical friends, to kind of make sure we're not being insular in how we're sitting in our office trying to work out how it should look. Because I think the best thing we could all do is a few of us create them and give the investor choice and diversification within impact, the way they had diversification and choice within the retail investors who wanted to be open-ended. So, I think that's just a really good place to be. But, that will just happen in its own good time when the market and the investable universe is ready to maybe move just from housing. For a lot of these people as well, there's the bucket, so the impact bit, housing's already been through that kind of stringent process of is it impact?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, yes, it is in that particular way. So it's kind of done that work. So it's kind of easy to stay there. So we're kind of trying to push for the next bit on. But what you were saying about offsetting, and I'm not a massive fan of offsets on the carbon side either, unless it's a method of last resort. But what I'm interested in doing, we're not doing it yet, but it's on my radar. I keep talking about it, annoying everybody with it. But is that, on the carbon piece, where you say have a portfolio that has a huge element of, say, industrial or retail warehousing or any kind of roof with the right expanse in facing the right way, is that if you've got solar panels on everything that you possibly can, but you've got a portfolio where you might also have a parade of retail shops that you will never be able to affect, you'll never be able to put a solar panel anywhere near them. You should be able to, at a portfolio level, link what happens on carbon I think that is actually, good fund management. But we just kind of all again need to kind of move towards these things. But I think things like that are places we should be, where you can see that there's obvious wins as well for these tenants in these buildings. For us at a portfolio level, where you want to have a diverse portfolio, but not every sector of the market lends itself to that kind of solar panel. You can still be dynamic for the investor on getting the right spread of assets, but overall, the carbon sort of spread around the portfolio.
Do you think as people wise up or take more of an interest in impact investing, and I guess the qualitative and quantitative aspects of how you measure it become a little bit more transparent, will that minimize any sort of kind of greenwashing or kind of lip service that may be going on?
Having streamlining of how we measure.
Yeah,
I'm sure it will, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who, I haven't personally come upon anyone who I think is doing a greenwashing job. I think everyone's really trying, but it's really, there'll always be somebody who's not happy with something. I think having transparent measurement, I wouldn't be happy doing anything in this area without just being really blatant with the investor of what works, what doesn't, when when certain things don't work, the timelines, the objectives. It might be a very bold objective on carbon, and it might be on a particular asset a bit more tame on the social side, but on another asset it might be really ramped up on social. It's about communication, and again, kind of going back to where we started, eyeballing your investor with what you can and can't do, and how you're trying to push the boundaries to make it the best way it can, while still giving that sort of sensible financial return. The other thing I suppose to say is that returns look different in all different jurisdictions as well. So the UK is, you can probably give kind of 6 to 8% return, which is a long-term return. I think is a really sensible return from a mixed portfolio of assets in the UK, whilst delivering impact. But if you're doing, for example, housing in the US, and with the variety of subsidies and the way it's just the whole way it's set up there, you'll give a bigger return than that. So you're giving, it's a variety pack impact. You can't just put a kind of global stamp on it and say this is what the world is.
Yep.
To create good impact. It will be different and be measured in a different way in different places. So it's being alive to that too. I think the UK is probably pretty purist.
Yeah. So 2023, we're kind of towards the end of January now.
Yeah.
What does the rest of 2023 look like for you, as head of UK Balanced Funds and the wider business as well?
So I'd like to win another diversified mandate. I'd like to get a cornerstone investor for the impact mandate, and just sort of keep pushing on what does the best in class look like, and keep striving to get it. It worked very well for us in 2022. So I don't doubt it can't happen again in 23, but I think we're probably the right kind of team for that kind of work. And on all the mandates, we were talking about impact today, but on all the mandates, really, the carbon focus is very real for us. Whether we've got a direct mandate, which we do on some of the stuff we're running to deal with carbon, or whether it's a lighter touch from the investor, we're driving it anyway, because I do believe the regulation, we talked about regulation kind of coming at us. People talk about, regulation's going only one way, all these kinds of statements. But, when it happens, it will give people a fright, the proper, stringent stuff. So I think that the more upskilling that everyone can do, and the more proactive everyone can be, the better place they will be. You do not want to be reactive on this. It's just not the right thing, but it's also really bad business.
How difficult is it to win a new mandate, from another investment management or fund management business? Because I've certainly heard in the market, there's been a little bit of a card shuffle going on at the moment. But
I guess you've got to get the RFPs right for a start. But getting in the room and pitching is probably one of the most joyful parts of it, because I think we can demonstrate what we can really do, and I think there's bags of integrity and determination to deliver for our investors that certainly sit around me, and it's getting the chance to do it is just the bit that we're just desperate for when we get something you really want to get your teeth into. But I think there's just so many there's good outfits out there, so we've all got to be on our game and making sure that we're the ones that can give an edge. I think the USPs for Nuveen, obviously, I would argue we've got a great team. So I would actually argue that's a USP, is that good a team. And I sound like I'm incredibly over enthusiastic about them, but I'm really not putting that too strongly, and they really are. But also I think that our ESG credentials and ability and backbone, like really understanding, really able to quantify with CapEx what it takes to do it. So it's not just sort of, oh, it'd be nice to have. It's really, really granular as well, is brilliant. The governance is absolutely brilliant. The asset management teams are, really great to work with and come up with things all the time that are things none of us had thought of. So they're just, they're always helping push our boundaries too, which is two-way for us in terms of, obviously we know what we can spend on assets, and they're coming at us with great ideas, and they really help drive that and deliver it. And that all makes a big positive difference, and is kind of a big reason why I can enjoy going to work, is I feel we are all still learning, and hopefully continues to be the case.
There's been a bit of volatility in the market.
Yeah.
How do you go about putting together a balanced portfolio?
Well, I've kind of been moving away from the word balance, only because I think balance feels old-fashioned, because people would assume it was kind of the three main sectors it used to be. But I think diversified, it's more about mandate by mandate, what is the best way to achieve what that investor needs. And you can get so much, you can get great long leases on, let's say, care homes, which before, right early on in the day when we were investing in them for the PAIF, I remember investment committees going, would there be reputational risk if something happened to somebody in their care home? And, it was right at the beginning of, can we really do this? That kind of feeling. And now it's such a run-of-the-mill thing.
Because the sector's become institutionalized.
It's just because it just what it hadn't been done before. But now, a mandate that is a variety pack of different kinds of assets for different reasons. I love an asset that's got a good plan B. So I like to know the plan as we go into an asset, and it's an obvious business plan that we want to do. But I mainly like to know that if that is not going to work out, that it's got great residual value, or it's in a location that the business the planners would allow as a change of use, or whatever the thing is. I think assets like that have a bit of an extra oomph for me, because you can still see it's not going to be so binary that you were in or you were out, and you were really out when you were out because the tenant surprised you by exercising a break you never thought they would, or whatever the thing is. And so I like thinking about portfolios like that. We have top-down views, and we all have our own opinions as well. But ultimately, I think you build a portfolio as you see the right assets come onto the market, and you can't always say that will the next thing will be a logistics unit, just to say the darling sector, or an alternative. It might be that it's actually retail warehousing, but it could become industrial, because it's that there would be potential for a change of use, and that they need more jobs in that area. And before there was only 16 jobs in a retail warehouse, 200 jobs in a distribution unit. Whatever that is, I think it could be that that's what you do because that's the right thing to do at that time. So I don't think you get too hung up on it being, specific percentages to specific areas of the market.
But you'd look much more broadly than you did a few years ago, just in terms of the types of kit.
I think we've been looking broadly for a long time.
And also the lot sizes that you would take off as well.
Yes, but I think, just going back to your broadly comment, I think we've been doing that for a long time, but now it's not a new thing. That is what you'd expect to do. So it's just that's a normalized behavior now, that all these sectors are potentially the next right investment. So that's kind of nice, because it's so broad, and it kind of should be. And actually, it would be great to link it in with with your infrastructure. We've got great renewables teams in house as well, and natural capital, and link when you're thinking about particularly and this is me kind of now blue sky thinking in terms of being really idealistic, but having a site where you could create community, you could have small holding, you could have the distribution that takes that to wherever it needs to. You could really create and use the different expertise that we have, not just in real estate but in real assets, to bring a bigger project together that could be a dial mover for an area and great investment for an investor.
Yeah, I guess definitely get the sense that that's maybe where the market's moving. From an internal perspective, how do you manage the competition between the different funds and various different other fund managers when your investment remit is slightly broader?
Yeah, I would say the competition's healthy. The teams all have different networks of people who will put assets to them. Sometimes there'll be overlap of what is either coming to the market. If it's off market, maybe it's not quite so obvious. And we have a schedule that is, to the moment the introduction was made, it's sort of very stringent. And then every Monday morning, everyone will go through that list. People will shout for things that maybe someone else is looking at and they want to have a look at too. And, if it got to a point where two different fund managers wanted to go for the same asset, there's a whole priority list of what had they said, what had they stated as they were looking for on a quarterly basis, which everyone has to set out. So start with that, move down the kind of ranks, and then, ultimately the investment would go to the investment committee if it had to and be debated, and there would be a decision about who would go for it. But I think that's a nice place to get into. I think there are less, at the moment, there's probably less of that because everyone's got different lot size bands that they're looking at, different styles of things. So we haven't really come upon a time where in the past probably 12 months where there would be something that, there was a proper showdown over.
So as we draw to a close, what are you most excited about over the next 12 months?
I think obviously the kind of correction in the market, I think that's bringing and has already brought kind of interesting opportunities forward that, the time is now on probably, especially with maybe some debt out of the market. People who are buying in equity can get better, run at some stuff. So we'll see how that plays out. I think it's a good opportunity on impact because potentially where you would be seeing 6 to 8%, you could maybe do a bit better if you could buy earlier in this new sort of cycle than later. And that might be a boost for investors who want those different types of returns, financial, carbon and societal. But ideally we'd like to know that you're getting in and your profits in the buying always, isn't it? So kind of making sure you're entering into these markets at the prices that allow you to really get the job done and still give a nice return and build up that track record with a good return as well. So that would be great. And ultimately, from my perspective, trying to win another mandate that would be, complementary in terms of a different profile to what we've already got, but really allow us to show what we can do, which I think has been proven a few times over in the track record because it's just such a long track record.
Question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, if you were given £500 million worth of equity, who are the people, what property, in which place would you look to deploy that cash?
So it wouldn't be one property for me, and probably unsurprising, it would be a portfolio. It would be something we could really kind of show what we could do, showcase what we could do, particularly on impact. I mean, if someone gave me 500 million to start the impact fund, I'd be absolutely ecstatic, especially right now in the market. That would be such a gift. And with a cost of living crisis, what better time to be starting to invest in areas, particularly postcodes of deprivation, where you can make, you've got the experience and you know how to make a positive difference. But it would be about diversification for me. So it wouldn't be one asset. And it would be, as broad a spread of those types of assets as we could get so that we can deliver different asset management plans at different times. So you can kind of get a couple of early wins in where you do create solid income for your investors that allow you then to get much more involved in heavier project work that can help a community, but can really get that buy-in to get a decent business in. So, from my perspective, I do believe that broad thinking is better than being just in one sector. I think that served us really well. It served investors really well in terms of what we've managed to do. And we do it with the highest level of thought going in to make it every asset the best we can possibly make it. So at a time like this, where yields have moved out, we've just gone through such an incredible quarter of outward yield shift. You've got to feel it. You've got to get that feeling the time is now to spend 500 million of equity and not have to worry about taking debt till later.
And the place? Would you have a broad range of geographies as well as asset types as well?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would. I think, people get worried, you'd like to have at least 50% in deprived areas. We've had many of our biggest successes in areas that would by postcode be defined as deprived areas. But it's about what you put there. It's about, if you want to own an office, clearly you're not rushing to buy something in a very particular regional location that doesn't have there's to-let boards everywhere. It doesn't necessarily make sense. But if you're looking to have a care home where there's a lack of care homes, some healthcare where there's a huge lack of appropriate healthcare, if you look by postcode at the sort of spider chart of, education, crime, commerce, transport, becomes really obvious really quickly what's lacking in that area. So, it's more about what's appropriate in a geography that will give you the opportunity to create business. I think that kind of tells you a lot. If we're observant, there's a lot of it there. I mean, property is about being observant and really understanding that, you're seeing it everywhere. You're seeing what's working and what's not working, and you've got to apply. And the amazing thing about property, probably one of the biggest highlights, is everyone has a view. Everyone goes into a building, whether you're coming into an office, if you're shopping, if you're going to the cafe, if you have your home, you go to the real world. Everybody has a view on property, and you can really journey take people. You can take them through the story of what you do, and they'll get it. It's different from, an equity or a bond in that respect. And I think that, that is incredibly good for the investor, because they have an aha moment. They always do when you're explaining a case study or something you've done. And that's probably one of the, the nicest things about property.
The final part of the question is, who are the people you'd have on board to help you with that?
Can I say my team?
Absolutely. That's probably, I'd be slightly worried.
If I said all that now, I wouldn't take any of my team. I would stuff you. There's probably a variety pack of people I could name, but they, you wouldn't know any of them. But from different teams, there were hugely impressive people that I really, I wouldn't be able to do the job we do well without being able to liaise with them. And it took a team. The mandate we won last year was an incredibly life-affirming moment, because it was a team that threw themselves. And if you so much as looked at me last year, we probably asked for help. And I'm not exaggerating. People who were kind of walking past were like, "Hang on a minute, do you not work in, come over here?" And, we saw every asset, team, all the asset managers, investment people were all out and about looking at all of them well before we pitched. It was a very energizing experience, and it just kind of doubles down the kind of amazing attributes that the team have in the UK in terms of how they approach real estate. And that was, when we won it, that was a team win. Absolutely. That was not down to one person. That was down to probably 40 people. And that kind of just makes the culture there. Then, we can really do something when we put our minds to it.
I get a sense, and I might be able to answer the question myself, but just before we close, one final question. What is it that really motivates you? Because we've touched on lots of different points here where you get really excited, but what is it that really drives and motivates you and has kind of kept you at the business for such a long time?
I get a really big buzz out of the team doing well. I don't think I've particularly got anything to prove. Maybe I get more outspoken as I have less that I feel I need to prove. I'll probably say that I can get my daughters tomorrow. But I feel like and that's maybe why with Impact, I'm very happy to do the hard messaging on that. I don't think it's not for all investors because they aren't ready, but I think it's important for people to hear it. It's a bit like an inconvenient truth. We all need to be a bit better than we are, and we can give you a financial return when we do it. So what drives me, probably a mixture of the factors. I like the variety of what we do as well. So it's not one thing all the time. And I don't just mean in terms of the different assets, but I mean in terms of our day, in terms of the kinds of things that are involved in our day to make it happen. I love going into, on inspections a couple of weeks ago, and we were in a building. It was just you get to see, especially in industrial, you get to see the most incredible way. It's the way that the UK actually functions, and you see behind the scenes how things are made and how things get to people, and the kind of things that are being innovated and pushed forward that are helping us all just live our lives daily. Kind of see the nuts and bolts of that. I think that's really good. I find myself being home, and the kids must be like, "Oh, shut up!" You're like, I saw somebody making duct tape today, and they're like, "Right," but we never think about that. We never think about how we were so expectant that if you go into, on the way down, you go into Ryman's or something, you just pick some up. You never think about where that's come from or how it's come together, or who's doing better ways of doing it that are more sustainable, that aren't using plastics, that aren't, that's the real world behind the scenes. And we get this lovely position of being able to invest in buildings that are they doing the best thing they could be doing in their area, their community, Are there ways of improving it? Are there ways of improving the efficiency of it? It's such a multi-layered job. There's probably the variety is probably the chief thing that I love.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing a little bit about your background, experience in real estate, and what you and the business are doing at Nuveen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague, subscribe, give us a rating, like or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of which guests you think we should get on the podcast or areas of the market that we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit experienced talent for real estate private equity firms, investment managers, REITs, property companies and advisory firms across the investment, asset management, development, fund management, ESG, cap markets, investor relations and general practice space. So if you're considering your career options at the moment or looking to attract top talent to come and work for you, head over to the website www.rockborn.com where you can find a wealth of resource to aid your search. Have a great day wherever you are and I look forward to catching you next time.